Welcome back to Random History. I'm your navigator as we explore the little known events and people that make history such an amazing subject. The events we delve into are probably not ones you've learned about in school. In fact, these are the ones that when you do hear about them, you're likely to think that they could not possibly be real. But they are. One of the last episodes I did in Season 1 was on the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Today, as we begin Season 2, I thought we could start by exploring another pivotal and controversial plane in aviation history. Another B-29 Superfortress, this one named Bockscar. This wasn't just any ordinary bomber. It delivered the second atomic bomb ever used in warfare over the city of Nagasaki on 9 August 1945. It brought about the end of World War II and ushered in the nuclear age. Today we'll talk about the background, the dedicated crew, their rigorous training, and the tense mission itself, as well as the profound ripple effects on global history. Stick around, this story is as explosive as it sounds. First, let's talk about the airframe, the B-29 Superfortress. Developed by Boeing during the war, the B-29 was a technological marvel, a long-range, heavy bomber capable of flying higher and farther than anything before it. It had pressurized cabins and a remote-controlled gun turret. But Bockscar was special. It was one of 15 silver plate B-29s modified under a top-secret program to carry atomic weapons. These modifications including removing armor and guns to save weight, installing special bomb bay doors, upgrading the engine for better performance. Built by the Glenn L. Martin Company in Nebraska, Bockscar, serial number 4427297, was delivered to the U.S. Army Air Forces in March of 1945 and assigned to the 393rd Bombardment Squadron of the 509th Composite Group at Wendover Army Airfield in Utah. Bockscar was named after its usual pilot, Captain Frederick C. Bock. It wasn't flashy, but it was built for one job, delivering unimaginable destruction from the sky. Now for the crew who flew Bockscar on that fateful day. These were elite airmen, hand-picked for the 509th, a unit shrouded in secrecy. For the Nagasaki mission, the plane was commanded by Major Charles W. Sweeney, a 25-year-old Massachusetts native who'd already flown as support on the Hiroshima bombing 3 days earlier. Sweeney was tough, decisive, and had a reputation for cool-headedness under pressure. His co-pilot was Captain Donald Don Albury, a steady hand from Florida. Second Lieutenant Fred Olivi handled regular co-pilot duties while Captain James Van Pelt Jr. navigated the vast distances over the Pacific. The bombardier, Captain Kermit Behan, nicknamed the Great Marksman, was a veteran who'd flown over Europe and would make the critical sighting that day. Rounding out the core team, Master Sergeant John Kaharick, flight engineer, kept those four massive Wright R-3350 engines humming. Staff Sergeant Raymond Gallagher as gunner and assistant engineer, Staff Sergeant Edward Buckley on radar, Sergeant Abe Spitzer handling radio communications, and Sergeant Albert Pappy DeHart as tail gunner, watching their six. But this wasn't just an Air Force show. Naval officers joined the bomb run as well. Commander Frederick Ashworth as weaponeer, Lieutenant Philip Barnes as his assistant, and First Lieutenant Jacob Besser on radar countermeasures, the only man to fly both atomic missions. These 13 men were not strangers. Many had trained together, bonding over the isolation of their classified work. Sweeney later reflected on the weight of their role, saying it was about ending the war, not glory. The pilots and crew of the 509th Composite Group, the elite unit tasked with delivering the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, underwent an extraordinarily secretive and rigorous training regimen that transformed ordinary airmen into specialists, capable of executing the most devastating aerial missions in history. Activated on 17 December 1944 under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, he would later be promoted to colonel. The group was headquartered at the remote Wendover Army Airfield in Utah's Great Basin Desert, a sprawling 3.5 million acre preserve chosen for its isolation and natural security barriers. This location, far from prying eyes, allowed the 509th to operate under a veil of utmost secrecy, with over 400 FBI agents embedded to monitor personnel, tail suspicious visitors, and even pose as locals to prevent leaks. Crew members were forbidden from discussing the work with family or friends under penalty of reassignment to remote outposts like Alaska or even imprisonment, ensuring that the true purpose, the delivery of these atomic weapons, remained top secret, even from most within the Manhattan Project. Training began in earnest in late summer 1944, drawing from a pool of newly graduated and combat veteran airmen assembled at Fairmont Army Airfield in Nebraska. Here, the Corps 393rd Bombardment Squadron formed, initially with 21 crews flying familiarization missions in the B-29 Flying Fortress to build unit cohesion and cross-train for potential substitutions. By September, the squadron relocated to Wendover, where the ground school commenced alongside the arrival of the first modified Silverplate B-29. As I said earlier, the Superfortress Silverplates were heavily altered bombers designed specifically for atomic delivery. These aircraft, produced by the Glenn L. Martin plant in Omaha, Nebraska, underwent Phase 3 modifications starting in early 1945. The removal of defensive gun turrets to reduce weight, installation of the powerful Wright R-3350 Mark 41 engines with water injection for high-altitude performance, reversible pitch propellers for rapid stops on short runways, and a reinforced H-frame bomb shackle capable of handling the 9,700-pound Little Boy uranium bomb or the implosion Fat Man-style plutonium device. A new weaponeer station was added for a dedicated officer to monitor the bomb's arming, fuses, and electronics, while pneumatic actuators ensured that the bomb bay doors would snap open in 27 seconds to minimize drag during these long Pacific flights. From October 1944, with the delivery of the first 3 silver plates, flight training intensified over the American Southwest. Crews logged hundreds of hours practicing high-altitude formation flying at 31,000 feet, radar bombing, long-range navigation, essential for the 1,500-mile journey from Tinian to Japan. Only 15 of the original 21 crews were selected for the atomic missions. Organized into 3 flights of 5, each honing precision drops to within yards of a target. A cornerstone of this phase was the pumpkin bomb drills. Hollow steel casings, shaped and weighted identically to fit the Fat Man, 10,800 pounds, filled with conventional high explosives and some cement, dropped over targets in the desert or later Japanese-held islands like Truk and Marcus. Each bombardier completed at least 50 pumpkin drops, simulating the release from 30,000 feet, and then perfecting the optical bomb sight alignment under real-world stresses like turbulence and glare. These weren't mere exercises between 20 and 29 July 1945. The group flew 12 combat sorties over Japan, releasing 51 pumpkins on industrial sites to gauge enemy defenses and refine tactics, all without revealing their nuclear payload. Winter brought harsh challenges at Wendover, where sub-zero temperatures, snowstorms, frozen pipes all delayed operations, forcing crews to adapt to cold weather startups and de-icing protocols for the massive B-29. To counter this, in January of 45, 10 crews detached to Batista Field in Cuba for 3 months of overwater navigation training, simulating Pacific crossings with mock radar intercepts and celestial fixes far from land. Back at Wendover, by spring, emphasis shifted to evasive maneuvers. Upon bomb release, pilots executed a 155-degree right-hand diving turn at a 60-degree bank, throttling to full power while dropping 1,700 feet of altitude to streak 10 miles clear of the impending mushroom cloud and shock wave. Late afternoon thunderstorms often grounded flights, teaching patience and weather forecasting skills vital for monsoon season in Japan. By May of 1945, the 509th deployed to North Field on Tinian in the Mariana Islands, with the first B-29 landing on June 11th. There, a week-long lead crew ground school from the 313th Bombardment Wing drilled air-sea rescue combat procedures and final rehearsals. From 23 July to 8 August, crews tested inert Little Boy and Fat Man assemblies and drops over the Pacific, including a full-cycle mission to Iwo Jima on 29 July to unload, inspect, and reload the mock uranium bomb, ensuring flawless logistics under combat pressure. Security remained ironclad, even on Tinian. Plutonium cores arrived via guarded courier with one dramatic standoff at Hickam Field in Hawaii, where a Manhattan Project escort drew a pistol to protect the components from unauthorized inspection. This 6-month crucible from Wendover's dusty runways to Tinian's coral aerostrips forged a unit of unparalleled precision. Tibbetts' men, averaged 25 years old, had logged over 1,000 training hours each, blending technical mastery with psychological steel. Their preparation peaked on 6 August when Enola Gay unleashed Little Boy over Hiroshima, followed 3 days later by Bockscar and Fat Man on Nagasaki. Missions born of exhausted, hidden toil that ended World War II, but scarred history forever. And now the mission itself, a 12-hour odyssey fraught with peril. On 9 August 1945, just 3 days after Enola Gay hit Hiroshima, Bockscar rolled out on Tinian's Northfield runway at 0349, loaded with Fat Man, a plutonium implosion bomb weighing 10,800 pounds. The plan, 3 B-29s in formation, Bockscar as a strike plane, the Great Artiste for instruments, and the Big Stink for photos. Weather planes scouted ahead, the Enola Gay over the primary target, Kokura, and Lagan Dragon over the secondary, Nagasaki. Trouble started early. A fuel transfer pump failed, trapping 640 gallons, unstable weight that cut their thin margin even thinner. At the rendezvous point over Yakushima Island, Big Stink never showed up, forcing a 45-minute circling delay that burned precious fuel. Sweeney pressed on to Kokura, an arsenal city, but clouds and smoke from nearby raids obscured it. 3 bomb runs, no clear visual, and rules prohibited radar drops. With fuel dwindling, they diverted to Nagasaki, their secondary target 100 miles south. Nagasaki, a shipbuilding hub with 263,000 people, was socked in by clouds too. Circling twice, the crew debated about ditching the bomb in the ocean to limp back to Okinawa. But at 10:58 local time, a gap appeared. Behan spotted the stadium aiming point and released Fat Man. 43 seconds later, it detonated at an altitude of 1,650 feet with 21 kilotons of force. That's the equivalent of 21,000 tons of TNT. The detonation was 1.5 miles off target, but the damage was still devastating. The blast vaporized people nearby, ignited 13,000 homes, and sent a mushroom cloud over 60,000 feet in the air. Bockscar banked hard to escape the shock wave, then headed south. Low on gas, they barely made Yantan Airfield in Okinawa. 2 engines actually quit as they touched down. Sweeney later called it the longest mission of the war. The immediate aftermath in Nagasaki was horror. The bomb killed about 35,000 people instantly, most civilians, including munitions workers, Korean laborers, and soldiers, with 60,000 injured by burns, the blast, and radiation. Hills contained some of the damage, but the city lost 44% of its area. Survivors faced black rain, a mixture of radioactive ash, dust, and mud within the fallout. For many, this led to acute radiation sickness. By 1946, deaths topped 70,000, eventually climbing to over 100,000, succumbing from cancers and other effects caused by the radiation. Because Bockscar had made 2 passes without dropping a bomb, Nagasaki's all-clear siren had sounded, which drew people out, amplifying the tragedy. But Bockscar's mission didn't happen in isolation. Its impact on history, monumental. Combined with Hiroshima, it forced Japan's emperor to step in and force the military government to finally surrender on 15 August 1945, ending World War II and saving millions from a bloody invasion. Emperor Hirohito cited the new and most cruel bomb in his broadcast announcing the surrender. It marked the dawn of the atomic age, sparking the Cold War arms race, nuclear deterrence, and treaties like the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. Today, 80 years later, debates continue to rage. Was it necessary? Surveys show mixed reviews. 35% of Americans today see it as justified, 31% not. Ethically, it raised questions about civilian targeting and weapons of mass destruction. As I mentioned in my episode on Hiroshima, I firmly believe that I'm alive because these bombs were dropped. Had we invaded the Japanese homeland, millions of American soldiers, not to mention the many millions more Japanese, would have been killed. Those numbers likely would have included my father, a fighter pilot at the end of World War II. Bockscar itself would eventually retire in 1946. It's now displayed at the National Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, with a Fat Man replica sitting right beside it. The display, fittingly, is right at the end of the World War II gallery, and it's appropriately labeled the aircraft that ended World War II. The crew? Sweeney defended the mission till his death in 2004, saying that it shortened the war. Others were less outspoken and carried the burden of all those deaths quietly. So that's the story of Bockscar, a machine and the men who altered history's course. Celebrating the plane that dropped the second atomic bomb may be seen as controversial by some. As I said in the Hiroshima episode, however, Truman's decision saved millions of lives by bringing the war to an end. Bockscar played an instrumental role in that. Some will say my choice of hero today is even more controversial. In fact, today's hero isn't my usual hero. He was not awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He did not bear arms on a traditional battlefield. But, like many true heroes, his impact reached far beyond the theater in which he battled. His influence and loss has been felt around the globe. Our hero, however, also has many detractors as well, most of whom had never really heard him speak or based their opinions on hearsay and comments taken out of context. Regardless, we find ourselves today in a time of reflection and resolve following the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk on 10 September 2025 at the hands of a left-wing radical who sought to silence him mid-debate on a college campus. This act of violence wasn't just an attack on one man. It was an assault on the very foundations of our republic: free speech, open dialogue, and the right to dissent. Today, Charlie Kirk should be remembered not just as a conservative activist, but as a true civil rights leader and hero of our era. Yes, you heard that right. In an age where civil rights have been twisted to suppress rather than liberate, Charlie fought tirelessly to defend the most fundamental right of all: the freedom to speak your mind without fear. Let me begin by reminding you who Charlie Kirk was. Born in 1993 in Arlington Heights, Illinois, Charlie was an Eagle Scout, a product of modest Midwestern roots, and a young man inspired by economists like Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. At just 18 years old, he co-founded Turning Point USA in 2012, transforming it from a grassroots effort into the largest conservative organization in not just the nation, but the world, with revenues reaching $39.2 million by 2020. Turning Point USA wasn't just about politics. It's about empowering young people, especially conservatives, who felt marginalized on liberal-dominated campuses. Charlie authored books like Campus Battlefield: How Conservatives Can Win the Battle on Campuses and Why It Matters. That was in 2018, where he laid out a blueprint for reclaiming academic freedom. He hosted the Charlie Kirk Show, downloaded 500,000 to 750,000 times daily, reaching millions with messages of liberty and limited government. Now, why would we call him a civil rights leader? Civil rights at their core are about protecting individuals from discrimination and ensuring equal access to fundamental freedoms. In the 21st century, one of the greatest threats to civil liberties isn't overt segregation like it was in the 60s. It's the subtle, insidious censorship that silences dissenting voices. Charlie Kirk stood as a bulwark against this. He was a self-declared champion of free speech. Charlie Kirk stood as a bulwark against this. He was a self-declared champion of free speech, leading Turning Point USA in advocacy that exposed and challenged the islands of totalitarianism on college campuses. Remember his Prove Me Wrong tables? He'd set up on campuses, inviting debates on hot-button issues, proving that free expression could thrive even in hostile environments. In 2024, his You're Being Brainwashed tour visited 25 campuses, amassing 2 billion social media views and mobilizing Gen Z conservatives who felt their views were being erased. Charlie didn't just talk about free speech, he lived it. He opposed crackdowns on pro-Palestinian protests if they targeted U.S. citizens' rights, warning that labeling speech as anti-Semitic could lead to broader censorship. In May of 2025, he criticized a U.S. bill aimed to ban Israel boycotts, arguing that it infringed on free speech, a stance that put him at odds with some within his own party, but it underscored his commitment to principle over politics. Even in his final moments, debating on a college campus in Utah, Charlie embodied the power of open discourse. His assassination has sparked a national conversation on free speech limits. Hundreds of people have been fired or suspended following callous remarks about his death, some going as far to celebrate it. However, these firings are not so much about free speech. They're about people in positions of responsibility, teachers, doctors, professors, that are saying through their words and actions that if you disagree with someone, then violence is the answer. That's why they're being fired. Period. Full stop. Critics, most of whom have only heard Charlie's comments out of context or secondhand at best, will point to controversies. His critiques of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as, again, out of context, a huge mistake, and turned into an anti-white weapon, or his opposition to DEI programs. But let's be clear, Charlie wasn't against civil rights. He was against their weaponization to discriminate against other groups. He saw conservatives, Christians, and traditional Americans facing systematic bias in education, media, and culture, a form of discrimination that demands a new civil rights movement. By founding TPUSA Faith in 2021 to mobilize religious communities, he fought for the rights of believers in a secularized society. He supported global efforts to decriminalize homosexuality, praising moves in Botswana in 2019, showing his advocacy extended beyond borders when it aligned with human dignity. This brings us to why Charlie is a hero. Heroes don't just fight battles, they inspire generations. As a close ally to President Trump, Charlie helped shape the MAGA movement and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously shortly after his assassination. He was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy in 2018 and received an honorary doctorate from Liberty University in 2019. But his true heroism lies in galvanizing young men and women who saw him as their champion, a father figure in the culture wars, the nicest person who engaged fiercely yet kindly. Despite the left vilifying him for the last decade, he inspired millions to get involved in politics, fighting for conservative values against overwhelming odds. His death at the hands of a deranged, brainwashed leftist zealot made him a martyr, supercharging the conservative movement worldwide and reminding us that free speech is worth dying for. Even religious communities that were divided on his views have united in denouncing violence and recognizing his influence. Israeli leaders honored him by naming a traffic circle in Netanya after him in 2025 for his pro-Israel advocacy. Vigils and demonstrations broke out around the globe, from South Korea to Poland, the United Kingdom, and across the United States. Charlie challenged norms, broadened debates, and refused to back down, traits of a hero in any era or conflict. Perhaps his most significant achievement actually happened at his memorial service. Hundreds of thousands of people showed up to pay their respects, and one of the biggest religious revivals in the country erupted. As Christian singers sang their songs of praise, the entire stadium full of mourners sang along. People that he touched quoted scripture, and maybe the most poignant moment came when his widow called for the forgiveness of his assassin. Charlie's legacy isn't about perfection. It's about persistence in defending civil rights when they're under siege. He fought for free speech as the ultimate civil right, empowering the voiceless and exposing hypocrisy. He gave both sides a platform and a microphone and challenged them to a free and open debate. In a world quick to cancel, he chose to converse. For that, he is a civil rights leader and truly an American hero. Let us honor him by continuing the fight, speaking the truth, debating boldly, and never surrendering our freedoms. One of the strongest messages that Charlie had in his debates was that when conversation stops, violence begins. It is past time for the political class and the press in this country to tone down the rhetoric and, frankly, learn some history. Neither side are fascists, Nazis, or a threat to democracy. Fascists used violence to keep their opponents too frightened to speak out. I find it extremely hypocritical when one side accuses the other of being Nazis or fascists, then uses the same tactics that true Nazis used to try to silence them solely because they have different political beliefs. We need to follow the money and see who's financing these attacks. I'm sorry if I'm getting a little political here, but we need to denounce any example of political violence, no matter who is proposing it, or worse, carrying it out. Anyway, this brings us to the end of another episode of Random History. I hope you enjoyed it and will come back and listen to future episodes. If you'd like to view the transcript or sources for this episode, just click the link in the description. You can also make suggestions for future topics by clicking that same link or shooting us an email. As always, I want to thank Argos Media for producing Random History, and of course, to thank my beautiful wife for her continued support and inspiration. Until next time, make some history of your own. Navigator out.